call to order our meeting, which is meeting number 126. And it is my privilege on behalf of the committee to welcome Minister Blair. Congratulations on the appointment, and I hope you see this committee as a committee to which you can readily access and hopefully be helpful to your mandate. So with that, I'll ask Minister Blair to make a presentation, and then we'll go around the usual round of questions. So again, welcome, and look forward to your statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to join you today. And as you can see, I am joined by senior officials from departments that have play a very significant role in my responsibilities, and I'm very grateful for their support today. As you've stated, Mr. Chair, this is my first opportunity to meet with you in my new capacity as the Minister for Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction. And I very much look forward to the opportunity to work with this committee. I see it as a valuable source of insight and advice that will assist me and the government and the departments and agencies responsible in their important work. As the Minister, my overarching goal is to help to ensure that our borders remain secure and to lead cross-governmental efforts to reduce organized crime. I and my officials have been working hard to get a head start on the priorities under that banner, which have been entrusted to me by the Prime Minister. The issues that we are tackling are not confined to a single department or agency. They run across government, whether we're looking at cannabis, irregular migration, guns and gangs, organized crime, or opioids. And that is why the Prime Minister has asked me to work with the full support of all of the relevant departments to ensure a coordinated and effective approach to these very important critical issues. And I am fortunate to have already forged a solid working relationship with many of the departments with whom I now work when I served as the Parliamentary Secretary to two ministers and had the opportunity to work across ministries on important issues. I look forward to working with all of my Cabinet colleagues and fellow parliamentarians on both sides of the House. I am pleased to provide some insight to you today as to how I intend to deliver upon my mandate. And first, I would like to begin by thanking this committee for their excellent and important work, careful scrutiny of Bill C-71, which yesterday, I'm pleased to say, passed the House at third reading. We cannot ignore the reality that offences involving firearms have been increasing over the last 5 years. I have seen that firsthand, not only in my city, but in communities across the country. And I am pleased that this crucial legislation makes common sense proposals to keep guns out of the wrong hands, to improve licensing classification, and to strengthen records commitments. Thank you for your amendments, and thanks to those amendments, the bill was further strengthened to propose additional background check criteria related to violent behaviour, which must be considered before a license will be issued. And additionally, you made helpful proposals to clarify non-restricted firearm transfers and providing greater certainty that no federal registry will be created with the enactment of Bill C-71 when it becomes law. These are welcome additions, Mr. Chair, to an already strong set of new measures aimed at reducing firearms-related crime in Canada. I am proud that I have been given a responsibility to support Minister Goodall as this bill moves forward throughout the Senate. And as my mandate letter has indicated, I've also been given responsibilities to examine ways to reduce gun crime involving the use of handguns and assault rifles while not impeding the lawful use of firearms by lawful firearm owners. And therefore, I will be beginning a formal process of engaging with Canadians on this important issue. And over the next month, my Parliamentary Secretary and I will host roundtables across the country. I'll stop and introduce my Parliamentary Secretary, who I believe is with us today, Mr. Peter Shefsky. There we go. Thank you, Peter. And we will host a series of roundtables across the country to hear from a wide range of expertise and opinions. We will also be soliciting feedback from law enforcement, municipalities, Indigenous communities, as well, of course, as our provincial and territorial colleagues. And in addition, we will create an online portal so that all Canadians can provide their thoughts on this important issue. Our government is open to looking at any measure that will be effective in keeping our communities safe. And we have already, Mr. Chair, invested over $327 million in initiatives to reduce gun crime and criminal gang activities. The majority of this funding will be going to provinces and territories to bolster local prevention and enforcement programs. and I want to emphasize that we need to take a broad and all-encompassing approach to reducing violence in our communities. In my time as a police officer and a police chief, I learned that in high-crime neighbourhoods there tends to be only a small number of people who victimize law-abiding people who are struggling with disadvantage. And those neighbourhoods often have higher rates of poverty, poor housing, higher rates of problematic substance use, a lack of jobs, a lack of access to mental health and other services, lack of opportunity, and a lack of hope. These are what are sometimes referred to as the social determinants of crime and victimization. And I can tell you in my city, we made every effort to ensure that we had a robust and visible police presence on the streets. But we've always held that addressing the social circumstances that give rise to violence is the other important part of that equation. In my experience, you cannot arrest your way out of these very complex social issues. Our government has taken steps to address these challenges. We've created a first-ever national housing strategy. We've implemented the Canada Child Benefit, which is addressing child and family poverty, and we have increased the amount of money which is available for youth employment. We will continue to work closely with all of our colleagues in all departments to make sure the government is doing all that it can to address crime. And the same must go for our approach to opioids. The impact of opioids, as this committee well knows, is being felt in communities of all sizes in every part of Canada. In the last 2 years, over 8,000 Canadian lives have been cut short due to opioid-related overdoses. I have been given responsibility of leading our work in reducing the smuggling of opioids across the border. Canada has a 4-pillar strategy, a national strategy for drugs. And an important part of that strategy is law enforcement. It is dealing with that issue of interdicting the supply of drugs, principally opioids, and some of the precursor chemicals used in the manufacture, as well as other materials. Law enforcement is an important part of this puzzle, and they will be supported. And as we work with partners to interdict the illegal supply, we also intend to do so in the context of the other pillars of demand reduction, harm reduction, treatment, and rehabilitation. This will involve involving a public health lens to address the illegal supply and distribution. It includes pursuing law enforcement activities to counter drug trafficking in a manner that also balances health and safety concerns. And Mr. Chair, in my experience, this is a transnational issue. I look forward to the opportunity to ensure that we are well equipped at our borders to maintain their security, and that we are able to tackle this problem with a whole-of-government approach. It also necessitates, and I am familiar with, a strong collaboration between Canadian and American law enforcement and law enforcement around the world. The illegal movement of narcotics and other poisonous drugs into our communities is a transnational crime problem and one that requires a global response. With respect to our other immediate priorities, we are, of course, only a few weeks away, 22 days away, as my colleague from Health advises me, from transition of a legal, adult-use cannabis regime in Canada. It is important to remember that the transition to legal cannabis will be a process and not a single event. We will continue to work collaboratively with all of our Cabinet colleagues on the implementation of this new form of effective cannabis control, and we are working collaboratively with provinces, territories, municipalities, law enforcement, and stakeholders across the country to ensure an orderly and responsible implementation. We believe that this new system will do a far better job than the failed current criminal prohibition in protecting our children from the harms of cannabis consumption, protecting the health and safety of all Canadians, and take billions of dollars in profit out of the hands of organized crime. With respect to my mandate commitments on irregular migration, the Safe Third Country Agreement, and opportunities surrounding clearance operations for travellers, I am keen to move forward quickly on these issues as well. I've discussed the former with the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Look forward to providing updates in the very near future. I feel that both Canada and the U.S. have an opportunity to demonstrate how our close partnership can help us adapt to an evolving and complex migration challenges while managing the border effectively. And to that end, I have written to the Secretary of Homeland Security to begin discussions about how the Safe Third Country Agreement can be improved and enhanced to the mutual benefits of both countries. And through all of these commitments, Mr. Chair, I'm honoured to carry out the responsibilities that have been entrusted to me. I look forward to your continued advice and engagement in keeping our borders secure and our communities safe. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Minister Blair, and you certainly make a chair's heart go pitter-pat because you stayed within the time limits. Now, first round is 7 minutes. First up is Michel Picard.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Minister. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to answer our questions. My first questions will talk about customs and asylum seekers. I'm from Quebec province, and of course this issue has been a bit complicated last year. Obviously, we have not heard about it that much this year. Would you please expand on the progress and your learning experience from last year and what happened this year, and maybe put the record straight as of today?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Picard. Last year, as you are all aware, Canada experienced a significant increase in the number of people who were seeking asylum who presented themselves irregularly at our borders, not at a regular border point, but at various crossings. The issue impacted a number of communities, but I think was most significantly impactful in the area of Laval, Quebec. The government and the agencies responsible began very quickly to develop and increase their capacity to ensure that for people who were crossing in the border that our Canadian safety was maintained. And so the RCMP, and I would commend them for their excellent work. I've been to Laval and I've watched ensure that anyone coming across the border at any place is subject to a vigorous security background check to ensure that there is no criminality or threat to national security. They've been working very closely with the officers and agents of the CBSA and the IRCC in order to ensure that those people are properly processed. We have also recognized that in the processing of those individuals, a significant backlog because of the surge, and the capacity of the IRB, the Immigration Review Board, and the capacity of the agencies, departments responsible, have been significantly limited by, quite frankly, a decade of underfunding. And so we have been restoring that funding, and $173 million has been invested into improving the efficiency of the process by which we are now conducting these hearings to which people are lawfully entitled to determine their admissibility. And we have also, after nearly $400 million in cuts in CBSA, restoring their capacity by investments of nearly $72 million to increase their ability to remove individuals who have been deemed inadmissible as quickly as possible. Now, we remain absolutely committed to upholding Canadian law and Canadian principles of humanitarian principles, and we have starting to see some success. We've also made significant efforts, Mr. Picard, in reaching out to the United States, reaching out to NGOs and community groups that have been working with the people who present themselves at our borders, and we've seen some success. And for example, I had a conversation with our colleague, the member representing Emerson, Manitoba, and I asked him about their experience because in 2017, in the winter of 2017, many people were irregularly crossing at a border near his community. And I asked him what the current experience was, and he advised me that after the Minister of Immigration went to Minneapolis, met with the community groups down there, explained to them that presenting yourself at the border seeking asylum is not a free ticket to permanent residency, and that they were going to be subject to legal processes and subject to removal if they were deemed ineligible, that flow significantly reduced. We've seen progress in these other areas, and so far in the last 4 or 5 months of this summer that has just immediately passed, we've seen a significant reduction. Up to 70% fewer people are presenting themselves at our border than was the case last year.
Thank you. I was happy to read on your mandate letter that you will address organized crime issues, and you know my interest on financial fraud. RCMP knows that as well, and there have been a number of changes at RCMP and challenges also to address those investigations on commercial crimes. We still have some work to do. We still have some issue to cover. I know that discussion about, for example, beneficiary ownership has been discussed to go further in fight against financial crimes. Issues also at RCMP with recruiting, where we need our resources, expert resources, to be as much as possible remain in those departments focusing on financial crime, which is such a specialized department. What is your take on that?
Well, certainly within my responsibilities, it's to address the issues of organized crime, and you and I have a shared experience in the enforcement of the laws and these crimes. We are informed by some recent and very important work that was done by Dr. Peter German, for example, in British Columbia, looking at money laundering through the casinos out there. And I've spoken to Dr. German. He's an old friend and colleague, and we have much work to do there. But it is fair, I think, to acknowledge that over a period of time, the capacity of the RCMP and the expertise to conduct those investigations was diminished. And there are a number of reasons for that, and I don't think finger pointing is very helpful in this at all. I think what is necessary is to restore that capacity. I've had conversations with the Commissioner, and my colleague could perhaps also comment, but we recognize that it's an important responsibility of the RCMP. As a member of the Canadian police community in the past, I will tell you that we relied heavily on the RCMP and their expertise in the conduct of these investigations, and municipal and provincial police services across the country work very much in collaboration and partnership with the RCMP because of that expertise in such areas as the integrated border enforcement teams, the combined forces special enforcement units, and in economic crime investigations. And so that's very important work. My responsibility will be to look to see if there are regulatory changes or changes to legislation that will enhance our ability to deal with issues of beneficial ownership and to strengthen our capacity to deal effectively and to be able to prosecute offenders for those important crimes.
Yeah, as RCMP started to approach differently the recruitment and the resources, because we have an issue, the pressure coming from national security, where they get all the staff moving to national security and therefore compromising capacity, not only financial crimes and other different departments.
Well, and if I may,
very briefly.
Yeah, if I may say so, operational decisions made by the RCMP with the deployment of their limited resources, I think, need to be done in the national interest, and I have every confidence in their leadership. But we also recognize that the deployment of officers and expertise to deal with national security or terrorist financing, which are critically important to the safety and security of this country, can result in a diminished capacity to conduct other forms of investigation. And so we'll continue to work to ensure that the RCMP gets the resources that they identify that they need to do the important work for which we rely upon.
Thank you, Monsieur Picard. Ms. Rempel, welcome to the committee. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Has the Prime Minister given you a mandate to stop people from illegally crossing the border from safe spaces like upstate New York and subsequently claiming asylum in Canada?
My mandate is very clear. First of all, the entrance of people coming to our borders is governed by a number of pieces of legislation, including, for example, the Safe Third Country Agreement between the United States. That is a bilateral agreement between our two countries.
But again, has the Prime Minister...
I'm sorry, I thought you wanted an answer.
I'm just asking you a yes or no question. Has the Prime Minister given you a mandate to stop people from illegally crossing the border from safe spaces like upstate New York into Canada? Is your mandate to bring the numbers significantly down?
My responsibility is to ensure the border integrity and border security and to manage the issue of irregular migration. Unfortunately, Ms. Rempel, it's not a simple yes or no answer. It's an answer that has a number of components, including working with the United States to look at enhancing the Safe Third Country Agreement, also making significant investments in ensuring that we can manage that flow in an efficient and safe way.
I'm sure you're going to spend a lot of money, Minister. My question, to be clear, so my understanding now is that you do not have a mandate to stop people from illegally crossing the border from safe spaces like upstate New York and claiming asylum in Canada, that it's just spend money.
No, that I would disagree entirely with that characterization, but my responsibility is to ensure that Canadian law is upheld and Canadian humanitarian principles are adhered to.
I would just say to both minister and member, it works a lot better when you don't talk over each other. So if we could just let the question be the question, the answer be the answer.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, and to just clarify the rules, this is my time.
It is your time.
And the minister, I have been asking the minister a yes or no question, which he has not answered. So just to be clear, I'm managing my time. Thank you.
That's actually not a point of order. But I do take your point.
Thank you.
And it does. I would reiterate the point that for the purposes of clarification, it works better when we don't talk over each other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sorry, Ms. Grimple. Ms. Sahota?
Point of order is just in response to Ms. Rempel. Asking a question is not badgering the witness, and I think that that's what's happening here.
Okay, again, that's not so much a point of order as a point of interruption.
May I respond? May I respond to that? I'm sure that
we're starting to use up your time, though.
Okay, so I'm at a minute 50 right now. Thank you. All right, Mr. Minister, you just so for clarification, you have not stated that your mandate is to reduce people. So I'll ask you a simple question: what is the tolerable limit per your mandate for people illegally crossing the border from upstate New York and claiming asylum in Canada and subsequently abusing our asylum system? What is the number that you're managing to in your mandate?
I would much prefer that people would present themselves at regular border points, and we're going to do everything possible to encourage that, including discussions with the United States.
But what does success look like? Like, is it 0? Is it 10,000? Is it 20,000? What are you managing to?
Success would be that all people coming to this country would cross at a regular border point.
So 0. So you don't want anybody to illegally cross the border from the United States into Canada?
We're going to do everything we can to encourage people to cross regularly into our borders.
But how many are you going to allow? Like, what is that number?
We are going to deal with everyone who comes to our border according to Canadian law and international conventions.
So if you don't have a mandate to stop people, what are you going to tell the Homeland Security, Secretary of Homeland Security in the U.S.? What's the number that you're going to tell him that you'd like to get to? Is it 0?
It's actually her, it's Secretary Nielsen.
Sure.
And what I am going to say is I believe that there are opportunities to negotiate and enhance a safe third country agreement that will operate more effectively to the mutual benefit of both countries.
But you can't negotiate that without understanding if you want to stop this phenomenon. So are you going to the negotiating table with the Americans saying we would like to stop this from occurring and get to 0?
The original intent of the Safe Third Country Agreement, when it was signed in 2004, was to more effectively manage the migration of people through regular border points, and I aim towards working with the Secretary in the United States.
So you don't have a number that you're trying to reduce it to?
As I've said, ideally we will encourage everyone who comes to Canada's borders to cross at a regular border point.
So that's 0?
We will encourage everyone who comes to Canada to cross into the country at a regular border point.
So success is 0?
Success is getting everyone who comes to this country to cross into the country at a regular border point.
Well, that is frightening. Your government said that you would be agreeing to pay for hotel rooms until September 30th for the illegal border crossers who are currently in the Greater Toronto Area. Will you be continuing to pay for hotel rooms after September 30th?
Yes.
For how long?
As I've spoken to the Mayor of Toronto, the City of Toronto has, as part of its temporary housing strategy dealing with people who require temporary shelter, a system whereby some of that is done through rental accommodation. And I've spoken to the Mayor and told him that we will continue to support their important work of providing temporary shelter for those individuals who need it.
So if you don't have a number that you're managing to this year to reduce the target, how many more people are you anticipating you'll have to house in hotels at taxpayer expense?
The number of people that went into that temporary shelter has been diminishing over time, and the City of Toronto is doing an excellent job, in my opinion, in helping those people find more permanent housing solutions. And the City of Toronto is also managing quite well the existing capacity that's coming in.
I'll take it that you don't have a number for that either. You, in an interview, said that the IRB backlog would decrease. But your department, well, they don't report to you, so I can understand why they would contradict you. They contradicted your answer and said that the numbers would not decrease given the considerable increase year over year.
I was speaking of two things, Ms. Rempel. First of all, we have invested a significant amount of money, some $74 million, in increasing the capacity of the IRB, which increases their capacity to about 17,000 additional hearings each year.
They said
but we are making additional investments and doing additional work in reducing the number who are presenting themselves. And in my opinion, the combination of all of those things will be effective in reducing the backlog.
Are you contradicting the IRB's assertion that the backlog won't decrease?
If all we were going to do was increase IRB's capacity by the current amount we've increased it, which is $17,000 per year, that would simply be consumed by the existing backlog which they inherited. But we're doing other measures as well, which I believe will be effective in reducing that backlog.
So what you've just said is you have no target to reduce the numbers by. You're keeping people in hotels, and you're adding more bureaucrats and hundreds of millions of dollars to process people who are abusing our asylum system.
Well, let me be very clear. We're adding people who actually do the important work of conducting these hearings.
So that's
under Canadian law. People are entitled to due process, and the capacity to do those hearings was very, very significantly underfunded and diminished for a long period of time, and we're restoring it.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ms. Rempel. Mr. Dubé, presumably for a less spirited exchange, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Minister, for your attendance here today. I'd also, well, I'll just give you a moment to put on your earpiece.
Get a little bit of indulgence from the chair on official language grounds. Thank you. Donc, moi aussi, j'aimerais parler.
I too would like to speak about the plight of immigrants, particularly the negotiation process with the our US counterparts that you referred to in your preliminary statements, and also in response to my Conservative colleague. Our concern is in response to a report that was released in May, and there was a number of possibilities and options on the table, and you know the New Democratic Party's position, but one of the options that was slated that Canada was prepared to agree to was to enforce the safe third country agreement across the entire border, which we find extremely problematic. Can you confirm whether that option is on the table and part of negotiations with our US counterparts?
Currently exists. The safe third country applies only at regular border crossings, and this is a bilateral agreement between our two countries, and we cannot unilaterally change that, although there's been a number of recommendations suggesting we should. We intend to have discussions, and quite frankly, the form and the outcome of those discussions, I wouldn't wish to speculate on, but we will be talking to the United States Secretary of Homeland Security in order to determine if that agreement can be made more effective, enhanced, to serve the mutual interests of both countries.
Mais donc, moi, je veux juste m'assurer que quand le gouvernement...
I just want to make sure that when the Government of Canada comes to the bargaining table, yes or no, will that option of enforcing the safe third country agreement across the entire US-Canadian border, will that be on the table as the Conservatives are proposing, which would create an invisible wall? Or are we going to rule out that option? I understand that it's a bilateral agreement, but we have a voice at the table, and I want to know what Canada intends to say, to the extent that you are able to share that information.
Again, I don't want to get ahead of those discussions, but I will tell you every option's on the table, and I haven't ruled out any possibility.
Thank you, Minister. I want to move on to, you mentioned the question of narcotics at the border and things like that. So there's two pieces here. The first one is for marijuana.
Yep.
So two questions about that. Number one, is there any plan for Canada to firmly stand up for Canadians who will legally consume cannabis and cross the border and see their entrance to the U.S. refused because of the seemingly contradictory information we seem to be hearing about how that's going to apply, understanding that the U.S. can have its own laws? And my second question about that is there any way that the government's going to move ahead on amnesty for criminal charges for simple possession that have taken place during the time when legalization was clearly a government policy, even if the bill had not been adopted by the House of Commons, so retroactive amnesty?
Thank you very much for the questions. First of all, with respect to the U.S. border, we have been advised by the Customs Border Patrol and the U.S. officials that they are not changing their policy or their line of questioning at the border for Canadians presenting themselves at that border. And of course, as you're well aware, they are a sovereign nation, and we cannot dictate to them who they can or should allow into their country, but they have indicated that they have no intention of making any changes. I will simply remind that for the last 5 years, since 2013, Canada has a very large and growing cannabis production industry for medical marijuana, licensed production, and employs thousands of Canadians, and which has attracted
Minister,
hundreds of millions of dollars
I
in
apologize
investment.
to interrupt you. My time is limited, and I only get one shot at this usually. So I just want to know whether you can assure this committee that Canada will be a strong voice speaking against the Americans arbitrarily refusing access
I wouldn't
to
characterize
Canadians
it as against anyone, but we will always stand up for the lawful rights of Canadians, and we are working very closely in the United States, making sure, first of all, that they understand the nature of the very strict regulatory regime that we're putting in place, but we're also making sure that Canadians understand that although it may be legal on the Canadian side of the border, crossing the border with any amount of cannabis can constitute a serious criminal offence in either direction. We want to make sure that no Canadian inadvertently gets in trouble with the law.
I want to make clear that we are talking about folks who admit to having consumed but don't actually have any and are behaving in a lawful manner. But I'm just wondering if you can address the amnesty piece.
Yes, and I will tell you, one of the things that motivated me, quite frankly, in this new legislation is to stop criminalizing our kids in particular, but we know that that's had a disparate impact in minority communities and Indigenous communities.
So will there be amnesty, yes or no?
And what I will say that how we might deal most appropriately with those existing records is very much under consideration, and I don't have a final determination, but it's being given every consideration.
My final question is, you mentioned the issue of doing better. I think you said doing better than the current criminal prohibition. You just talked about the impact that this has on kids. I'm just wondering how you square that circle with today signing on to a unilateral, non-negotiable agreement with the U.S. to continue the failed war on drugs, considering that that's something that's been denounced by, among others, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and other world leaders, and going against sort of the multilateral approach that your government seems to want to take. In particular on this issue, I just see a contradiction there. How do you square that circle?
Well, I would differentiate the difference between cannabis and drugs that kill people, including the illicit opioids, crystal meth, and other drugs. I think we do have a responsibility to do everything possible to interdict the supply of those drugs coming in.
Not do that with
but
a
we have
multitude
also,
of countries and just take Donald Trump's unilateral proposal?
What needs to be emphasized, we have restored the harm reduction principle to the national drug strategy in this country. We have taken very significant steps, which I could reiterate if we had more time, and I'm happy to do it later, to ensure that harm reduction is a reality in our communities. We're making investments, working with provinces and community organizations to restore the principle of harm reduction, which is a public health approach.
But I feel if there's a unilateral proposal from the Americans and we have our other allies who are saying that we shouldn't be signing off to some unilateral, non-negotiable agreement to continue a failed policy that goes against exactly the principles that you're mentioning, how do we square that circle? Why won't Canada sit down with other countries and tackle the issue? Because you're absolutely right that these drugs are dangerous, but why adhere to failed policies that are being put forward by...
You're going to have to save that answer for another opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Dubé. Ms. Soda, 7 minutes, and I believe you're splitting with Ms. Dema?
Yes, I am. Okay, well, thank you, Minister Blair, for being here today. All very important topics, and I know that Canadians are very interested in all of them, so thank you for taking on this challenging file. In previous questioning, we heard quite a bit about reducing irregular border crossers to the number of 0. I'm just wondering, have you looked at data going back and the migration patterns that we've had over several decades? And was the irregular border crossing number 0 under the Conservative government?
I don't have that data, and perhaps I would ask some of the officials if they could tell. I don't believe we ever achieved 0, but I think we should do everything possible, and that is my intent, to encourage anyone coming to Canada that they cross at a regular border point. It's where the facilities and the resources are to deal with that most effectively, and it is very much our intention to do everything possible to encourage those who choose to come to Canada for any reason, do so at a regular border crossing.
Has the number ever been 0 before?
If I may, Mr. Chair, we would have to double check, but I believe it would be very improbable.
Yes. Very improbable is what I've seen from my research that I've done before. I've never seen a number so low. And I've also seen that there's been spikes at different times given different issues that happen in global events. And so what our migration patterns? Is Canada the only country in the world that is dealing with irregular migrants, or are other countries dealing with it? And if so, what are the numbers there?
Yeah, I've been advised that there are close to 65 million people who are currently in processes of migration. We've seen around the world significant movements of people, and also significant people, a number of people who are fleeing persecution and the risk of death, who are seeking asylum in various places around the world. The numbers that are affecting Canada, certainly it's an increase over what we had previously experienced, but it's not without precedent in Canada. In 2012, as I recall, there was a significant number of people who presented themselves seeking asylum in Canada, approximately 37,000 people. We also saw a very significant increase in 2002. And going back through our history, with the Hungarians fleeing back in the mid-50s and the Vietnamese boat people, we've had significant surges of people as a result of events that take place in other parts of the world. Canada has a long tradition of upholding humanitarian principles, and we just want to make sure that our laws are upheld appropriately as well.
And I believe the Safe Third Country Agreement was enacted in 2002, maybe in response to some of those surges. But in 2012, when you said there was a surge, did the Conservative government cancel the change the Safe Third Country Agreement?
That negotiation did take place in 2002 and came into effect in December of 2004. I'm not aware of any effort made by the Canadian government subsequently to cancel that agreement. Or to amend it in any significant way.
Interesting.
It may have happened, but I'm not aware of that.
Okay. I'll pass it along to my colleague. I know I'm taking up a lot of time.
No, you didn't at all. Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for being here. Before I ask my question, I just want to say I have a University of Ottawa student shadowing me today, Henry Mann. And I'm very proud that he's here to witness the committee meeting, but I'm really disappointed in the lack of civility that he's seen at this table, and it's unfortunate that our young people are witnessing this kind of lack of civility amongst colleagues. My question, Minister, has to do with intimate partner violence and firearms. The Ontario Coroner's Death Review Panel in 2016, which is the most recent report, showed that 26% of intimate partner deaths involved firearms. I had a woman who wrote on my Facebook wall who said, I could withstand the psychological and physical abuse, but when he put the bullets in the shotgun, then I knew true terror. There was a study that was done in rural Atlantic Canada where 2/3 of women whose homes had firearms said that when they knew that firearms were present, they were less likely to come forward. And I'm just wondering if you can comment, Minister, on the correlation between firearms and intimate partner violence.
Well, I would rely on my experience more as a police officer and a police chief and dealing with that in the largest urban centre in Canada. And I will tell you that in police officers attending the intimate partner violence, domestic violence calls, one of the very first things they will inquire about is the presence of firearms in the home, because the presence of firearm in a home where domestic violence and intimate partner violence is taking place exponentially increases the risk. And so it's one of the first inquiries. There are existing authorities under the criminal code where the police become aware of the existence of a firearm in a home in that situation, have the authority to remove it. That is available in law. But I can also tell you in many conversations with women who have been victims of domestic violence, one of the things that so often happens is the woman will come and whisper to the police officer that there's a shotgun under the bed or a firearm in the closet. And the psychological trauma associated to the presence of that firearm is devastating to that individual, notwithstanding, and I agree that the presence of a firearm in the home, again, increases, in a domestic violence situation, increases the likelihood of death.
Thank you, Minister. I have about a minute left, and I wanted to get you to clarify something. People crossing the border, are they irregular or are they illegal?
Yeah, I think the law is very clear in that when someone comes across our border at an irregular point, that's unlawful. We actually have a sign up at these border points. If you go to Lacole at the end of Roxham Road, you will see a sign there that says it's unlawful to come into the country. And so the actual stepping across the border is unlawful. But under Canadian Convention and in Canadian law, when that individual makes a request to an official for asylum, their presence in the country ceases to become unlawful, and they are entitled, under international convention and Canadian law, to a hearing of that application. And so their presence is not unlawful from that point on. And so all of these individuals are first confronted by the RCMP. The RCMP advised them they're not allowed to enter until they make that application. When they make that application, they're then subject to very vigorous security and background checks to make sure there's no criminality. If there is criminality, that's dealt with. If there's a national security threat, that's dealt with. But if they are making application for the protection of Canada, they are entitled to due process to determine their admissibility.
Thank you, Ms. Namoff, Minister Blair. Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials, for being here today. Minister, you have frequently referred to an idea that somehow law-abiding gun owners in Toronto are responsible for gun crime in Toronto. Your government has gleefully pushed that idea that half of crime guns in Toronto were diverted from the lawful stream. Yet in reality, there is no surge in crime guns that can be traced back to licensed gun owners in your city, none. In fact, evidence from your former police service, the Toronto Police Service, suggests domestically sourced guns are closer to 10%, not the 50% that you are continuing to purport and misleading the Canadian public with. There is, however, a continuous flow of smuggled U.S. firearms and prohibited guns that you can't buy in Canada anyway. So interestingly, last week, you were quoted as saying evidence will guide my decisions, our decisions, something you repeated again yesterday in the House, Minister. So, Minister, do you actually care that there is no evidence to support a plan, your plan, to stop law-abiding gun owners from owning handguns?
Yeah, let me clarify a couple of things. First of all, when I speak of gun violence, I never do so gleefully. I consider it a tragedy in many of our communities. I also think it's very important to avail ourselves of the best available evidence, and I will acknowledge too that the data on the origin of guns is incomplete. I can share with you that during the 10 years that I was the Chief of Police in Toronto, I directed my investigators to make every effort to determine the origin of all crime guns that were seized. During that period of time, what was reported to me as a result of that direction and order within my own service, we had, for example, a member of the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms people, embedded in our firearms unit in Toronto that assisted us tremendously in tracing the origin of those guns. We were able to determine.
Minister. However, these stats are recent. It drove the whole gun debate this past summer. The handgun ban, it drove the entire ban this past summer.
I'm referring to different
stats.
Hold on,
I'm asking a question. However, you continue to purport that this 50% is a legitimate number when it's been proven by the Toronto own stats that it isn't. Your mandate letter calls for an examination on a handgun ban. However, Chris Lewis, the former commissioner of the OPP, Adam Palmer, the Canadian president of the Canadian Police Association president, Commissioner Lucky, from the RCMP, have all come out and said any such ban is not the answer. It's not going to work. So, looking beyond the, what evidence, I guess, beyond political theater, do you have that this will actually help public safety? If you aren't listening to the experts, what evidence do you actually need to show that the handgun ban is a bad idea, it's all smoke and politics, and for you to get to drop this whole charade, if you will, and actually work toward the serious nature of guns, gangs, gang violence, and illegal firearms in this country? What evidence is it going to take for you to look at that?
And Mr. Monk, let me assure you that we will do our best to go and get the best available evidence, and where it is incomplete, to try to fill in those blanks. We will also seek the advice of experts and the people with various opinions and perspectives. I have been asked to look at taking effective measures to reduce gun violence. Those measures take many forms, but they also include limiting the flow of guns into the hands of criminals who commit violent criminal acts. We know from experience, notwithstanding the incomplete data, that there are essentially two sources by which those guns can come into criminals' hands. One of them, as you've quite rightfully identified, is illegal smuggling in from other countries, principally the United States. And I can also tell you from personal experience, because I've been involved in a number of criminal investigations where we've seen illegal diversion of handguns in the domestic market from people either through their carelessness or as a result of theft and robbery, or because of criminal intent, they're selling the guns that they've lawfully
I
obtained
appreciate
into the criminal
the comment,
enterprise.
Minister. However,
and so I'm going to
you're
look
not
at any
presenting
measure.
us any evidence today that suggests that the numbers you're purporting that the domestically sourced firearms are the real problem in this country. Now, you had said in your opening remarks, and you've said repeatedly, as well as Mr. Goodale, that you and your Liberal colleagues talk about an investment in gangs and gang prevention. You talked about $500 million, 327 announced during a by-election in Surrey. As to the reason why your government has, passed yesterday to the Senate C-71, which does nothing to stop gangs and gun violence in our country. However, just last week, you tabled a document in the House that confirmed that you haven't spent a dime of the $327 million that was promised over a year ago, and it's going to take another 2 years or a year and a half for it to even be rolled out. So I guess my question is why? What is stopping that money from being spent on law enforcement, on the labs, and all the work that it takes to keep Canadians safe and deal with public safety, not just a charade?
The document that was tabled was...
Thank you, Mr. Motz. I don't know that Mr. Motz really wanted an answer to your question to his question because he's run out of time. So, Ms. Engelman, 5 minutes, please.
So, Chair, thank you very much. Minister Blair, welcome, and thank you for being with us. In your exchange with Monsieur Dubé, you had touched upon the restoration of the harm reduction principle as something that you want to elaborate on. When time ran out, I want to give you an opportunity to finish the point that you were making.
Yeah, in my experience, when we're dealing with something as complex as the opioid crisis, a focus entirely on enforcement misses important work. And so we know that there are a number of people, naive users, the range of Canadians who are having difficulties with substance use and misuse and are in serious jeopardy of overdose as a result of this drug has demanded a bit different and more robust response. And so we've worked very hard and diligently with public health officials, with law enforcement, with people right across this country to restore the important principle of harm reduction. We have supported communities that wanted to establish opioid prevention centers and supervised injection sites. For example, we've also made sure that we've made available the antidote, naloxone, to law enforcement, to first responders, to those who can save lives. We are looking at every measure where it is possible to reduce the harm that these drugs are committing. 8,000 Canadians in the last 2 years have lost their lives to this. And frankly, in my experience, you can't arrest your way out of that. We have to do everything that is necessary. And that includes supply interdiction and enforcement, certainly, but it also includes reducing the demand for these drugs through public education, helping those naive users be safer. For those who are experiencing difficulty with these drugs, a harm reduction strategy that saves lives. And for those who wish to enter into treatment, that treatment and rehabilitation should be readily available to them in a timely way. And so we believe that all 4 pillars are what is necessary to make this work.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Blair, could you give the committee an appreciation of how important international cooperation is on your work on organized crime reduction? Not just with allies bilaterally, but even all the way up to the international organizations, including the UN. How much work is done internationally to help us do our job here at home? And vice versa, how much
I will tell you, I wouldn't presume to speak for the RCMP, but I actually chaired the National Organized Crime Committee in Canada for almost a decade. I'm a graduate of the FBI, and I've worked collaboratively with the Homeland Security Committee on national security and organized crime. We work with Interpol, we work with Europol. We have very close collaboration with the UNODC, the United Nations Organization of Drug Control, working in Southeast Asia because we know that's the source of many of these drugs and precursor chemicals. There's ongoing important collaboration that's taking place under the leadership of the RCMP through their Federal Policing Division, but also involving all levels of law enforcement. And I will tell you, even quite simply, we talk about stopping things at the border, both firearms and drugs. A goal line stance doesn't work. You've got to work in the red zone. So what I mean by that is you've got to conduct organized crime investigations into the people who are involved in this enterprise criminal activity. And that means good collaboration and cooperation between law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border. The United States, or the RCMP for us, leads the integrated border enforcement teams, IBETs, and they also work very collaboratively internationally. And I will tell you, because I was part of the international law enforcement community for a very long period of time, that collaboration is the only way we can effectively respond to transnational crime trends.
Minister Blair, is human trafficking part of your mandate, and if so, could you give the committee an update on what the government's doing?
Yeah, I can tell you human trafficking, in as much as it's an organized criminal activity, and it most certainly is also within my mandate. And so the government is making significant investments and working very closely with community partners in order to ensure that we have strong laws, but also the resources that are necessary to tackle this. I will also tell you that also has a significant international component, and so working collaboratively under the leadership of the RCMP with our international partners is a significant part of that work. But in my experience, human trafficking is an organized criminal activity, organized crime, and it requires a robust response.
Thank you. I've got 45 seconds left. How important is recruitment as the pathway to reducing organized crime?
Yeah, you mean recruitment into organized crime, or for us?
Yes, no, recruitment into organized crime.
Yeah, well, you know, there are a number of portals into organized criminal activity. And organized criminal activity, you know, sometimes we think of it in terms of traditional organized crime, but frankly, organized criminal activity can include the recruitment of young people in poor communities, in marginalized communities where there is a strong sense of exclusion and social injustice. Exclusion initially through drug trafficking. I will tell you that the National Threat Assessment, I can't talk about too much, I guess, but in my experience in the National Threat Assessment, there are several hundred organized crime groups in this country, and they make the vast majority of their money through the illicit drug trade. And so the recruitment of young people into those things, I think that is a significant issue for us. And frankly, the threat of enforcement isn't the only way to deal with that, but making investments in young people and communities to help them make better choices is an important part of our strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegelman. Thank you, Minister. Ms. Alsa, welcome to the committee. 5 minutes.
Just to clarify, Minister, we heard you say earlier that you are not going to achieve zero people illegally crossing the border from safe spaces like upstate New York.
I believe you might have heard someone else say that. I said our goal is to eliminate irregular migration.
So exactly how many people who have illegally crossed into Canada and claimed asylum have been removed from Canada?
Okay, they are all entitled, as I've indicated, to lawful due process. There is a backlog, and we are working very closely. We've actually put $173 million, including $74 million, into IRB to increase their capacity to deal with that backlog. We also have a significant...
But not the backlog. How many have been removed?
Now, from which group? Because we have been removing people as a result of those IRB hearings.
Border crossers and gone through the process, how many have been removed?
Well, that surge actually began in 2017, and the vast majority of those people are still in the process of having their eligibility to remain in Canada determined.
And so
when that is completed, then it is the role of CBSA to effect an orderly removal.
You don't have a number? So, in French, après avoir dit qu'un écrasant...
After having stated that a huge majority of the immigrants have left the country, you've backpedaled and said that you misspoke. Now, we understand that only 6 individuals were subject to removal. How many immigrants exactly were deported?
Well, first of all, if I may just clarify with respect to refugee claimants, in 2017-2018, the CBSA removed a total of 4,184 failed refugee claimants, and of these,
that's not what I said. I said how many of the irregular border crossers have been removed?
Thank you for the opportunity to answer that question. Of these, 124 were irregular migrants that have been removed.
So the number is 124 since when, Minister?
In calendar fiscal year 2017-2018.
So, Minister, it sounds like the costs of irregular crossings to taxpayers are mounting. So if we tally the costs that taxpayers are being asked to foot the bill for, there's the cost, well, of you, Minister, a new minister, to deal with irregular border crossing. There's the cost of additional police and IRB processing to address the increase in volume in the backlog. There's the cost of hotel rooms and social support services to support these individuals for an indefinite period of time. Has the Prime Minister given you a blank check to charge Canadians an unlimited and undefined amount rather than addressing and eliminating the issue of irregular border crossing?
No, Ms. Ellishev, of course not. But in fact, we are making significant investments to restore a significantly diminished capacity at CBSA and IRB to do the job of upholding Canadian law.
But if there were no irregular border crossing, we wouldn't
Canadian
have
law,
to
we're
spend
putting the
this kind of
resources
money.
back that were previously gutted from those budgets.
So, Minister, Canada's condo market has become a haven for transnational organized crime to launder illegal money. How much illegal money is being laundered into Canada through our lax regulations?
Well, and I think that there's clearly an issue with respect to money laundering in this country. It's been, I spoke earlier in my remarks about the work of Dr. Peter German in British Columbia. I think that there's important insight and advice.
So how much, though? Give us an estimate.
Yeah, I don't have a dollar amount in its scope, but what I can
Minister,
tell you is we clearly identified as an issue.
how can you address a problem if you don't know what the scope of the problem is?
Well, and again, perhaps I can turn to senior officials who are doing more timely work on that.
But you're the minister, so you should have a ballpark idea of how big the problem is to be able to address it.
The laundering of money in Canada is unacceptable to us.
Is the number increasing? Has it increased in the last year?
Well, I can tell you that the evidence that has been presented, particularly in the report that was conducted in British Columbia, strongly indicates that there is a serious problem that needs to be addressed, and it's my job to go and address it.
Minister, FinTrack has provided over 2,015 disclosures of actionable financial intelligence. So the number of actionable intelligence has increased by over 120% since 2012. So if the numbers of actionable information is increasing, then one perhaps could argue that the number and the scope of the problem is increasing.
Unfortunately, that's going to be where we're going to have to leave it. Ms. DeBruzen, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Minister. I'm happy to have you here today, and I was actually very happy to have you in my community over the weekend to talk with members of my community because as everyone here knows, my community was directly impacted by gun violence in a public space just in July 22nd, where there was a mass shooting. And then a month to the day after that, along the Danforth again, there was another shooting where a life was lost. So it's an issue that is very much to the heart of many people in my community. And what was interesting, I found at the town hall that we had some experts speaking, and I see that part of your mandate letter involves responding to gang activity and involvement in gangs. We had Mr. Louis March from Zero Gun Violence, who spoke very much about the need to ban poverty, he said, and to address poverty. Professor Scott Wortley from the University of Toronto also talked about how a lot of people who were present at the town hall who were against any further restrictions on handguns were pushing to stronger laws and deterrence in the sense of stronger laws, because people have to have something to lose for deterrence to work, that we really had to get to those root causes in communities that might turn people towards gang activities. I was wondering if perhaps you could speak a little bit about that part of the need to address violence in our communities and gang activity, about the need to address the causes that were addressed by Mr. Martin and Professor Wortley.
Yes, ma'am. I've worked on the issue of gangs in Toronto. I will tell you as well, as I've traveled across the country, I've learned that the nature of gangs and the origin of gangs, those social circumstances and determinants, are different in different places in the country. And Lower Mainland BC is different than Toronto in areas around Saskatoon in Indigenous communities. It's different issues, but what we often see is that there are significant issues of poverty, as you've mentioned, a lack of access to services, a sense of social injustice and disparity that can exist in those communities. I will also tell you, in my experience, for many of the young men who get involved in gang activity and then subsequently in gang violence, they're not really thinking about the consequences of their act, and I've been involved in their apprehension and arrest of many of them, and in large investigations into the individuals and organizations involved in that criminal activity. Many of them don't see a future for themselves, exactly as you indicated. And so I think it's really important that we do more than simply interdict the supply of guns or incarcerate those who commit crimes. It is the job of the police to investigate and to bring to justice those who are responsible for that violence. But if all we do is invest in enforcing the law, we tend to stay awfully busy. And you actually have to go into communities, and this is something that I will tell you with some experience in Toronto. You have to go into communities and change the circumstances under which that violence takes place. And that is not just a policing activity. It's an investment in housing. It's an investment in communities. It's an investment in kids. It's support for those youth groups and organizations, as represented by Mr. March, who actually can make a real difference in those communities, help those young people make better choices. And so we recognize there is no one simple solution to the issue of gun violence. I know many people will focus on, if we only did this, that solves the problem. In my experience, you have to do 1,000 things and you have to do them well. And we should not be afraid to do anything that makes our communities safer. I think it is a responsibility that we all share, that we do all of the things that will keep our communities and our kids safe.
Thank you. And I'll say that the strong response following the incidents in my community, in fact, members of my community, is concerned about the supply of guns and wanting to reduce the supply of guns on our streets. And so I've heard a lot about statistics back and forth, but no one has actually said, from all the discussions about stats, that the number of legally sourced guns that have ended up within our illegal markets on our streets is zero. What I understand is that there is still, and it's come from the Toronto Police as well, there are straw purchases. Professor Scott Wortley talked about people lending guns or having people legally purchase guns. Is it correct that at least some of the guns that are ending up on our streets may have originally come from domestic sources that were legal?
Unfortunately, the time is run on the question. We started a little late, and there has been a bit of back and forth. I think we'll go with Mr. Dubé for the final 3 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'apprécie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate you giving me this last couple of minutes to speak. Basically, I'd like to ask you a question about an issue that was broached earlier that was in your mandate letter, and that is plea clearance. And there's going to be increase to pre-clearance opportunities, and you're aware of the controversy around C-23 regarding powers that Canadian border officers have on that US border officers have on Canadian soil. So do you intend to increase pre-clearance in existing places, and do you intend to extend further powers to US border guards on Canadian soil or review the current agreements?
I can tell you that I am quite prepared to look at pre-clearance where it is appropriate and where it will actually improve the experience of going back and forth across the border for Canadians. We're looking at ways in which we can improve the movement of goods and services across that border, because I think that's good for the Canadian economy. It is not my intention to change the authorities that U.S. agents operating on Canadian soil would have under the existing legislation. I think it's important to always ensure that anyone enforcing the law or rules in Canada uphold and respect Canadian law, Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I think that's an important principle that has to be maintained. We will look at ways in which we can continue to improve the experience and the efficiency of people moving back and forth across our borders. We will always stand up for Canadian rights.
I appreciate that, Minister. My final question before my time runs out is just to ask if you can give us more information what this public consultation on a potential handgun ban will look like. We've heard it announced that it's happening. Is there going to be more town halls like in Ms. DeBruzen's community? What's the format going to be for this consultation?
I'll try to be very brief, Mr. Chair. We are going to have an online portal that all Canadians can contribute and have say, because I think this is an issue that impacts communities and Canadians right across the country. I will be conducting a number of expert roundtables where we'll be inviting expertise and opinions from all sides of this discussion and debate. We are also going to do an analysis of the data, and where the data is incomplete, to find a way to make it as informative and effective and useful as possible. We will look and examine closely the experience in other jurisdictions that have enacted other measures to ensure that it's effective. I want an opportunity to invite submissions from interested parties who can inform this discussion and debate.
Thank you, Mr. Dubé, and on behalf of the committee, Minister, thank you for your appearance and that of your officials. And as I said at the beginning, and you reiterated, I hope you see this committee as more friendly than less and more helpful than less. So with that, meeting is adjourned, and I just remind colleagues on the subcommittee that we will be in camera in another 5 minutes after the room clears. Meeting adjourned.